Actually, that would be awesome. Let me.
Hi, Lana. How are you?
Uh, Hello. Fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're going to start this call pretty much right after the top of the hour, okay? And
Okay.
I'm going to start talking, and then I'm going to hand it off to them. I'll let you know. Give me about 90 seconds, if you wouldn't mind, okay? And then we can start
Sure.
dialing out. That'd be great. Thank you.
Hmm.
Santa Clara, can you hear me?
If by Santa Clara you mean here in the council chambers, the answer is yes.
I'm going to start the call now.
Okay, Nora, we can
Thanks.
start as well at the same time.
Thank you. Go ahead and start the call, Lana. Don't start until I
Okay.
tell you to go, though, Sam, because it goes to messages first usually. Well, there's some people that have dialed in already. That's not true. Just give it a second. Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome to our telephone town hall meeting. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to be on for the next hour. We're having a telephone town hall on the phone and in person in the chamber. So you're going to hear some live people there asking questions and some people asking questions over the phone. And that gets to the point. If you want to ask a question, please don't hesitate by pressing 00 on the keypad on your phone, 0 if you have a question. We're also compiling email names and addresses and all that so we can keep you updated with what's going on in the city. So press 7 to give us your email address. We won't share that email address with anybody else. Again, welcome to our telephone town hall meeting. This is with a live studio audience as well as on the telephone. For the folks that are on the telephone, again, if you have a question, please press 00 on the keypad on your phone, 0 if you have a question, and 7 if you want to provide us your email address for email updates. One more time on this. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our telephone town hall meeting. Thank you for joining us. If you have a question, please press 00 on the keypad on your phone, 7 if you want to provide us your email address so we can get you on the email list. Sam, take it away if you would, please.
Thank you, Kurt. So for those of you in the room, that was Kurt. He's our moderator for those joining in on the phone. I wanted to welcome everybody who is here joining us for this town hall. This is our very first town hall here, maybe ever, but certainly in a long while. And definitely this is the first of many town halls to come that I'll be hosting as your city clerk. And today's doubly special because while it's our first town hall, we're also trying something new. We have participants who are here, a live audience in the council chambers. We have folks watching live at home, whether it's on the city's channel on TV, but also on the city website and streaming live to Facebook and YouTube pages. And for the first time, we are actually we have folks who are dialed in live on the phone who are participating as well. And by participating, I mean that they actually have an opportunity to ask questions live from the comfort of their home via the phone call. So, I'm going to open with some brief remarks, but I really want this town hall, I'm going to dedicate the entire hour really for questions that residents have about our Santa Clara's dark money ordinance, what has been going on. And, like I said, today's topic is a very serious one. And while it's serious, it's meant to be informational, right? We are here to talk about the city's dark money ordinance, what has happened with regards to dark money activity in this current election cycle, and it is meant to be informational. We are not going to be. There's going to be a lot of calls potentially and questions about Measure C. This is not an advocacy or informational session about Measure C. As your elections official, I am impartial and being unbiased with anything with regards to Measure C. And this session is not to talk about Measure C. This session is to talk about dark money. So certainly, if you have questions about Measure C, this is not the forum for it. We are talking about dark money. So I wanted to just start with some brief remarks to kind of explain. A lot of people ask, what exactly is dark money? And dark money, in short, is when we have in this country, whether it's nationally, at the state level, even in local politics, political campaigns that advocate for certain candidates or ballot questions, some people contribute financial funds or, in-kind, what we call in-kind contributions towards advocating for or against a particular measure or for their candidate of choice. The key is that as people contribute, especially financially, as people contribute financially, the idea is, you hear this phrase a lot, follow the money, right? Who is paying money to advocate for a certain candidate or for a ballot measure? Dark money is when the individuals or organizations that are contributing funds towards influencing a political outcome do not disclose the origin of those funds. And federally, there are provisions that allow them to conceal their identity, to conceal the source of funds, if the amount of funds that they spend is less than $50,000. Now, in 2016, Santa Clara actually was a great case, or not great, but it was a case of dark money coming in to influence voters' decisions towards our city council candidates. And many of you have heard of Blue PAC. So Blue PAC was an organization in 2016 that was formed, and it was a dark money organization. Dark money, it's not some a term that somebody made up. It is actually a 501c4 or 501c6 organization. So it is a federally registered organization, and so long as they do not contribute more than $50,000 towards influencing the outcome of a political race, they do not need to disclose the source or the origins of their funds. As a result of the 2016 dark money influence from Blue PAC, the city of Santa Clara passed in 2018, in May of 2018, a dark money ordinance. And in that ordinance, the city basically said that if anybody contributes $100 or more towards affecting a political campaign, that source of funds must be disclosed. So as a matter of fact, this is actually a first of its kind ordinance, probably in the state and actually possibly even in the entire country, where a local jurisdiction has basically said, look, if you want to participate in our elections, in our local politics, you have to disclose who you are. And so any source of money of $100 or more must be disclosed. Now, for those who violate that with regards to any sort of local elections in Santa Clara, there are severe penalties. We can get into that. I'm sure some questions will come up on that. So now, why is this so important now, particularly with this election? This is the second general election since that dark money ordinance was passed. It was passed in May of 2018, and this is the second general election since that ordinance was passed. But we potentially have the very first violation of that dark money ordinance with what has happened in the last couple months. In December of last year, residents reported receiving, myself included, got this phone call, an anonymous poll trying to influence and affect voters' opinions against Measure C, and also asking questions or trying to influence voters' opinions towards council members and the city manager. And I put a call out to residents informing them that such a call had been made to a large number of Santa Clara residents. And based on the tip that I received back from my call to action to the residents, I sent a warning letter out to 7 individuals, 4 of them from the 49ers, 2 registered lobbyists with the city of Santa Clara, and 1 polling firm. And that is the first potential violation of our dark money ordinance, because nobody disclosed, they failed to disclose the campaign contributions or the money that they were spending on trying to influence voters' opinions towards a local ballot. So that's kind of just the introduction. With that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and the format that we're going to do here is Kurt, who is the moderator. You all heard his voice earlier at the beginning of the call, or at the beginning of the town hall. He's queuing up questions. If you are on the phone and you'd like to ask a question, you can press 0. You'll be queued up for the phone. And we also have folks here in the room, so if you'd like to also ask a question, you're welcome in the room to queue up. And since there's nobody at the podium here in the room, Kurt, take it away with the first question.
Well, you've covered a lot of the great questions that we had that came in earlier, and I just do want to remind you, for the folks that are on the telephone right now, please press 0. That's 0 on the keypad on your phone, 0 if you have a question. We're taking questions on the dark money issue only, and so if you have one, that'd be great. We'd really appreciate it. You already went through what dark money is and the ordinance and when it came about and all that kind of stuff. Where do people find out more information about this dark money issue? Where do they look it up?
Well, this is the town hall to share that information. It's a great question, Kurt, and to whoever asked it. This is the first town hall that we're doing, and it is really informational to educate folks about what dark money is. A lot of people, I see some nodding in the room that people really aren't familiar, who haven't heard of dark money before. This is really that informational session to educate folks, because this is a fairly new ordinance that we passed, and it is a one-of-a-kind nationwide and certainly statewide. So we have in our city code, in our city, the section on dark money, and I encourage anybody who is interested to follow up and to read more about what constitutes dark money, what penalties there are for violating the dark money ordinance. All of that is in the city ordinance. So that's all there, and certainly any questions here tonight, I'll be happy to answer. So.
And we do have some that are up with our screeners right now, and they're getting them queued up. So keep pressing 0. We've got 3 questions coming up in just a minute. But I had another question that came in earlier too. Why is this so important? And I had another question that didn't come in. Are there other cities in other states that are doing something very similar?
So as far as other cities and other states doing something similar, Santa Clara really is, we are in a historic moment, because we are the very first city, to my knowledge, that has passed a dark money ordinance to curb the influence of dark money in our city. So this is a first of its kind, and because this is the very first potential violation of the dark money ordinance, this is an opportune moment for us to educate the community about what it means, what the ramifications are, and to also educate them so that they know when they're making decisions at the ballot box, how to follow the money. So, Kurt, we have an individual here in the room who's queued up to the mic, Diane. And do we need to unmute her mic, or is it live? Okay, awesome.
Hi, my name is Diane Harrison. I just had a question. We didn't get the phone survey that you're mentioning that was a violation, but I recently got by email a survey from the POA, and I'm just really curious. I have no idea. Is that considered a violation since it says it was from them or not?
So I think you just hit the nail on the head. So Diane is referring, and I actually got a message by a friend over the weekend who sent me screenshots of the same survey that I think you're referring to. Over the weekend, some residents reported receiving a survey by text message from the POA, and from the screenshots that I received, it indicated that there were some questions about Measure C. There were also questions about, people's opinion about the police and fire department, and about a potential safety bond measure. But you hit the nail on the head, Diane, which is the fact that you knew who it came from is the first indicator that this is not dark money, so that you know who the source was, and the difference between that and what residents received in December, myself included, when I received the phone call from the pollster, I asked multiple times for them to identify who they were, who was the organization behind, funding the phone call. And the difference really here is, rather than a simple informational or kind of inquisitory survey, surveys that are designed to influence voters or to influence their opinions about certain candidates or ballot measures, enter into a gray area where it's no longer just an inquisitory survey, but it is actually designed to influence voters' decisions. So there's two elements here, and I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Now, I also want to mention that I did receive, literally on the drive here, a phone call from the president of the Police Officers Association, giving me a courtesy call, informing me that he and his organization did put out this survey. And so I appreciate that. Because they are just doing an informational and collecting information, that may not need to be required, that may not be required to be reported as an independent expenditure, but that's the difference between what has happened in December and what has happened over this last weekend. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, sir.
Kurt,
Who do
we
you
have
wanna do next?
we have a couple other people queued up here. I see that you have several questions. We'll take one more in the room, and then we'll jump to give folks on the phone an opportunity to ask as well. Welcome.
All right, thanks. I think actually you kind of touched on my question because I was going to ask the survey that you received. The violation, if you will, was more that it was not revealed as to who was doing the poll or the survey, not so much as if it was trying to influence you or anything like that. It was they did not, reveal the source. Is that the real key factor of this dark money issue?
So there are two parts to this, right? There's when we look at enforcing election law about how we have fair and transparent elections, both at the state, there's the federal level rules and regulations, there's state level requirements, rules and regulations, and then now we have with our city, with the dark money ordinance, is a local rule and regulation. There are potentially two violations that have occurred with the survey that happened in December of last year. The dark money violation is that there was no campaign filing identifying the source of funds for that contribution or that political activity. The second, which is a potential violation of the Political Reform Act, which is a statewide regulations that is enforced by, you see a lot of times in political mailers, FPPC, which stands for the Fair Political Practices Commission. They enforce state regulations. Because the contributor or the actor in this case did not file in a timely manner in the time period for that activity, they also could be in violation of the reporting requirements from the FPPC. So activity that covered between July and December, political activity that was covered between July and December was required to have been reported by January 31st. And January 31st, after the close of the business day, I sent a letter by mail as well as a courtesy email copy to the 7 individuals that I identified as being involved in that, informing them that not only had they missed the deadline, but they were also engaging in dark money activity in Santa Clara. So I sent that letter to the 49ers and their political consultants. And the immediate next business day, they came in the office and filed their campaign committee. So really here, in that letter, I identified the potential violation that they have occurred, both with the dark money and the failure to report in a timely manner. And the next business day, they came and filed their campaign committee and also reported monetary contributions, $17,000, $125 on the first day, and then 2 days later with a contribution of $300,000. And we just received an additional contribution this last Friday of an additional $300,000.
So if they were in fact violation of that, then they'll be fined or cited by the, from the state?
So from the state, I have reported this to the FPPC with regards to the violation of the timeliness of their filing, but the city is also pursuing the violation of the dark money ordinance because that is our local jurisdiction.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. Kurt, I think we're gonna jump over to I see some questions on the phone, Kurt, so take it away.
All right, well, let's take one right away if we can. This one, let me take one. Let me take John right now if I can. John, welcome to the call. John, go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, my question is how much of how much money goes into like qualifies as dark money, either in the Santa Clara elections or overall, to get an idea of the scope of this problem here for us.
That's a great question, John. So federally or nationally, dark money is any money that is spent where you cannot identify the source of those funds. Both federally and at the state level, and even in our local jurisdictions, there are tools online that are linked also through the city's website to allow any resident to be able to follow the money and identify the source of political contributions. So any political contribution where you cannot actually trace it back to its origin is considered dark money. At a federal level, dark money is legal so long as the organization that is spending that money spends less than $50,000. The city of Santa Clara, in their dark money ordinance, they're not overruling that legal statute, but what they are stating is that if you are participating in politics at the local level here in Santa Clara, whether it's a council candidate race, whether it's a ballot measure, anything that is at the local level, and wherein somebody spends $100 or more, the source of that $100 or more needs to be reported. Otherwise, it would be in violation of this ordinance.
All right. Well, thank you, John, for that. Let's take another question if we can. Let's take Pat. Pat, welcome to the call. Pat, go ahead with your question, please.
I have to come off mute. OMG. So it sounds like a lot of the contention is revolving around Measure C. Having observed that, it seemed like the discussion in the redistricting commission early on was around whether we would do ranked choice voting. And yet when we came out to report to the council, the committee recommended going to 3 districts. That seems like a major shift, and I did not attend all of the later half meetings. So the fact that the Yorks are opposing it does not necessarily mean this is all evil, dark money. It means for whatever reason they're opposing it. So how do we make sense of all of this? And how do we untangle Measure C from dark money and Darth Vader and all that stuff?
Great question, Pat. I want to be very clear that this forum is really not to talk about the merits or demerits of Measure C. Folks are certainly welcome and free as they are, to educate themselves about the pros and cons of voting one way or the other on Measure C. This forum is not to advocate about that. And as your elections official, I am holding myself to unbiased and impartial on this issue. So this town hall is to strictly talk about dark money. So having said that, I think you did bring up some questions as to whether or not dark money would, whether it means that Measure C is good or bad. That's beyond the scope of this town hall. I think residents are free to make their own opinions and conclusions based on the information they have about Measure C. Dark money can apply to anything, and as we basically have seen in 2016, dark money in 2016 elections was actually trying to influence voters' decisions towards council candidates. So it wasn't towards or against a measure, it was towards and against council candidates. So dark money can come and try to influence elections for any item on the ballot, and so that's Santa Clara's dark money ordinance here really is to enforce being able to identify who is spending money on influencing voter decisions. So thank you for the question, Pat.
I want to remind the listeners on the telephone, if you have a question, please press 0 on the keypad on your phone. And we are collecting email addresses tonight so we can beef up the email list so we can send out correspondences from time to time. We will not share that email address of yours with anybody else. You press 7 to do that. So it's 0 for questions, 7 for email addresses. Margaret wanted me to read her question. It goes like this: how does this dark money come about, and what does it consist of? I know you covered it, but she still asked the question.
No worries.
What are your thoughts, please?
Yeah, so again, individuals and organizations can contribute money or what's called in-kind contributions towards any political campaign. So, or they can do it without disclosing who they are, without disclosing, where the source is coming from. And if I recall, even Pat brought up in the prior question about the mailers that people have been receiving. In all of these mailers, you'll see if the person sending the mailer is actually following the law, you'll see on the mailer an indication of who is funding and sponsoring that mailer. So this is true for people running for office, issues. Look at all of your mailers and you should see where that money is coming from. If you don't see it, that's a violation of the law and you need to report it, and we're happy to take any of those reports. So you can reach out to myself or anybody in the city clerk's office for any of those reports. So as far as, where does that money come from? People spend money to influence voters, influence opinions, and that is what would then now at that point constitute a requirement for disclosure. And so when we see that, they've spent $17,125 on that poll that happened in December, that is without disclosing who they were until they were caught. That is a clear violation of the dark money ordinance. And last week, they filed their expenditure report, and this was the very first public admittance of actually being behind that survey. So we've seen some news articles and news reports where they have admitted it to reporters, but because they have actually now admitted it publicly on their expenditure report that they filed last week, that they were the ones behind the survey in December, it's very clear here who the violator of that dark money ordinance was. Kurt, we have some folks queued up in the room, so I'm going to pass it over here, and then we'll take some more from the phone.
Gotcha.
Good evening, Hassam. It's my honor to address you as a city clerk. Very proud of you being here, and of course, you have my support going forward. A couple years ago, I got a crash course on dark money, and just trying to do the math, and of course, finances, do follow the money. I understand that you was over $600,000 now that this group has raised to vote no against a charter review committee that gave it to the city that's saying this is what we suggest we do. Is that correct? Charter review committee put this together for us? Measure C. I'm talking about Measure C.
That's correct. I do want to make sure that we're keeping the focus of the town hall on dark money and not specifically about Measure C.
But that's really what they're going against with this amount of money. What I wanted to bring up was how much money have Santa Clarans come together to support Measure C, which obviously is what the city has given us as their recommendation. Do you have a number there that the Santa Clara residents have put together?
Okay, so there is no campaign committee that has filed to advocate yes on C. So in terms of any campaign committee that is advocating for yes on C and contributing financially to that, the answer is no. Residents and, we all have our First Amendment protected, freedom of speech rights. So telling your neighbor and advocating with your neighbor and your friends, trying to influence them which way to vote is not something that is reportable under the law. But when you have individuals or organizations that are contributing sums of money to influence voters, whether you see lawn signs, mailers, TV ads, radio ads, that is all material money and contributions. Those are required to be reported under the law. So when you have organizations that fail to report that, that is a violation of the dark money aspect. And because of Citizens United and our First Amendment freedom of speech, protected rights, spending millions of dollars to influence voters towards an outcome is legal, so long as you disclose who you are. Okay. And so really what's happened here is a case of the 49ers not disclosing that they had spent this political expenditure until they were caught. Okay. And so that is really the issue at hand here with what dark money is.
And really my point is that Santa Clara residents are, I'm going to say, very intelligent. Right now we're just going about our business, worrying about our city, and I know how I'm going to vote, but it's crazy that someone has to spend that kind of money to try to influence us. For why? You just got to follow the money. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Kurt, we have one more here in the room, and then we can switch over to phone questions.
My name is Wes Fukuyama, and I was one of the plaintiffs against Measure A. I mean, against at-large voting. I fail to see why this seems to be focusing on Measure C a lot. But I want to ask a question about 2018 June, when a man named Arnold from Texas gave $90,000 in two different, $45,000 each to the city to pass Measures A. Was that dark money? I'm wondering why also the city, if it puts out a ballot for Measure C, why doesn't it talk about the opposing opinions against Measure C? The other thing is, this money, I have nothing to do with the 49ers, so I'm just a resident of 45 years here.
Okay.
And I wish this does not focus on Measure C, but it seems to be all about Measure C.
So, Wes, to your question, thank you for your question. On the first question about you're mentioning an individual by the name of Arnold who contributed funds to, I guess, support Measure A back in 2018. Why this is not dark money is the fact that you know who spent that money is a clear indication that this is not dark money. The fact that you are able to follow the money back to its source is a very different scenario than what residents in Santa Clara received in 2016 with Blue Pack, where at the end of the line when they were trying to find the source of the money, they just saw Blue Pack. They didn't see who actually gave the money to Blue Pack. But the fact that you are able to find out and root cause the origin of that money to an individual by the name Arnold is an indication that it is not dark money. The same thing, which is what happened here with the 49ers. They did not disclose that they were contributing and spending that political contributions in December to try to influence voters against Measure C. Whether you are for or against Measure C is beyond the question. The idea is that they did not disclose, they were not transparent, they were not honest, they were not following the law about disclosing their political campaign activity, and they only did so after they were caught and sent the violation notice. So they were sent a violation notice, and that is what prompted them the next business day to show up and file their campaign committee report. So that is why we're talking about dark money. This is not to advocate for or against any measure. This would have happened if we had the dark money ordinance back in 2016. We would have a similar town hall talking about this for Blue Pack. But we didn't have it then, and that's why this is a first of its kind ordinance in any local jurisdiction to be able to root out the source of money. So the second question that you asked about the city passing out or mailing flyers informing people about Measure C. So as you're well aware, as a resident of being a resident of Santa Clara for many years, Santa Clara typically does not have elections during the primaries. Typically, our elections for council and chief of police and city clerk happen in the general election in November. So this is a very rare case in which the city of Santa Clara actually has an election in a primary election. And this year it's March, which is unusual. It's the first time that they're having it in March. The city of Santa Clara actually does have educational outreach to all of its residents about voting. So we inform people that, hey, there's issues on the ballot. You can go and vote for it. The city does not take a position or advocate to tell people which way to vote. So all of the flyers that the city has sent out with regards to Measure C were informational to inform them what is already in their voter booklet, in their voter guide, which is printed by the Registrar of Voters. And even that printing from the Registrar of Voters is money that the city of Santa Clara has to spend and pay the Registrar of Voters. So educational and informational outreach is totally within what we do with every election. The city spends that money. We have that money allocated for educational purposes, but the city is impartial and unbiased. We do not take a position to advocate for or against any measure or candidate. So thank you for your questions, Wes. I appreciate it. Kurt, we'll take a question from the phone, and then I have another person here lined up. And I think for the folks that are on the phone, they've been waiting patiently, so I have two queued up. So we'll take those two, and then we'll take in the room. Kurt, you there?
I got to hit unmute.
Thank
I
you.
muted myself. Sorry about that.
No worries.
If anybody has a question, please press 00 on the keypad on their phone. We're going to take Neil next. Neil, welcome to the call. Neil, go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, my name is Neil, a 20-year resident of Santa Clara. And a couple of questions, please. So when there is money declared for contributions, how does that information get communicated or make visible to the voters and the citizens in Santa Clara? That was my first question. The second is a suggestion was around that we should require that the communications have some disclaimer saying that it is in compliance with the dark money ordinance, city ordinance, so that we're not confused by the communications, whether it be email or print or or other ways of communication. And then my last question is I think that as we set our city is setting a precedent that I expect that we could become a target under pressure from broader PACs, from either national or state, to undermine this measure because it may not be in the best interest if it catches on elsewhere. And how do we protect the measure? Because I think it is a good thing.
Thank you, Neil. I think I got three things from you. If I miss one, then I think, Kurt, I'll ask you to unmute Neil again so he can re-ask it. But I think I got all three. So the first question, which is, how do voters know who is in compliance and who isn't, and where can they go to figure that information out? That's a great question, Neil. On the city's website, you can actually go, and under the city clerk's subpage, you can follow. There's a link that you can click, and it will expand for you all of the past elections in Santa Clara. You can actually go back in time and see who spent money to which election, and you can also see it for the current election that is going on right now. So all political campaigns are required to submit FPPC, that's the Fair Political Practices Commission, forms. There are different forms that they got to file, and they submit it with the clerk's office, and then we upload it to this portal. So it's a very self-serve portal. You can go online, you can pull that information, you can look at it, you can actually track the source. The question, I think, was a prior question, which is, how do you know if it's dark money or not? And that's if you can't track the origin of the money, of the contribution. Now, it's called dark money because you can't see it. You don't know it's there. You don't know who's spending that money. And that's what makes it very difficult for organizations like the City of Santa Clara to be able to enforce that. But thankfully, because of the tips that we received from the residents, from the community, we were able to identify the source, and the source actually acknowledged by coming in and filing their own committee. So I think that was your first question. I think in the same vein, you had a question about whether or not the city has a target on its back for being the very first of its kind to oppose dark money or to have stricter regulations against dark money, and possibly being a target from other PACs nationwide who may not want to see a precedent set. And I think that's what makes the City of Santa Clara so great, is that we are setting a precedent. We are actually telling outside influences that if you want to participate in Santa Clara, you gotta follow the law. And when you break the law, we're gonna come after you. And that's what happened here in this scenario. That's what happened when the 49ers chose not to disclose their political activity and being caught red-handed and being. So the second question, the second point that was brought up by Neil, which is, excuse me, I'd like to maintain order here. So the second question that was brought up by Neil, the question here, which is, or it was a recommendation as to whether or not we could require on the forms whether contributions were in compliance. These forms, Neil, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but these forms are state forms, so we can't add a specific provision on that form for the City of Santa Clara for people to check off. But certainly the clerk's office, which, and me as your elections official, that is my responsibility and duty to pursue and chase any violations of the dark money ordinance here. So great question, Neil. I appreciate it. And I think I got all three. Kurt, I think we can take another phone call, and then we have one lined up here in the room.
We're going to take Mark. Mark, welcome to the call. Mark, go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your service. Thank you for this new law, and thank you for identifying this person that might have violated this law or this organization. But my question is, why is this suddenly being focused on? I was looking at the campaign contributions of many of the elected officials in city of Santa Clara and council members and measures, and it looks like campaign violations have been happening all along, and they subsequently pay a fine and they rectify the situation. But there seems to be a focus now on the dark money in this particular instance, which is great. But I'm just wondering why here and why now, rather than and not bringing up any of the past offenses and violations that have occurred.
That's a good question, Mark. So I want to make a distinction between violations of our local ordinance, which is the dark money ordinance, and general or violations of other natures, which would apply to the Political Reform Act, which is enforced by the FPPC. So this is possibly the very first violation of our dark money ordinance. So the reason we are holding this town hall, the reason that we are informing the residents, is because the dark money ordinance is a new ordinance. This is just the second election since the ordinance went into effect and since the ordinance has passed. So this is an ordinance. Any violations of our local ordinance is enforced by the local jurisdiction. So that is my responsibility as the elections official, working in conjunction with our attorney's office on pursuing those violations. Violations that potential violations of the Political Reform Act, as you mentioned, Mark, going through people's candidates and other measures, contributions, those would be reported to the FPPC. Every resident has the ability and the opportunity to report those to the FPPC. They can be reported to me as your elections official as well. And as you mentioned, Mark, some of those violators have been fined, which is the result of the FPPC investigation. So the FPPC handles those kinds of violations. They do not handle our local ordinances, which is why it's really important that the city, and we are, taking this very seriously with potentially the very first dark money violation from the 49ers, specifically here for Measure C, but again, it could have been for any measure or any candidate. Great question, Mark. Thank you. We'll take one here in the room, Kurt.
You bet.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for holding this town hall. And I apologize if I'm going over something that I walked in a little bit later than. What I'm wondering is how we can identify the source of the money, because I get these mailers that say, committee to reelect so-and-so, and well, who exactly is that? Whereas perhaps if the American Red Cross or somebody was paying for it, I would feel like I knew what that was.
Great question. So if you had gotten a mailer that said, vote for, Mickey Mouse, right? And it had no indication of who was paying for that mailer, that is dark money. And that is a violation of, that's not just a violation of dark money, but that is also a violation of the state law for requiring to disclose campaign committees and the source of the source of those flyers. So when you see on a flyer campaign to elect Mickey Mouse, you can actually go online and look up that campaign, and you'll receive all of the forms that they have filed, who their officers are, who is contributing, how much money they're contributing to, and where they're actually spending that money. So you would see that they had spent a certain amount of money on that flyer itself. They would have spent it on radio ads, TV ads, web ads. So all of that is reported in these forms, and because you know who that flyer came from, you can go online just from the portal that I mentioned and be able to track that down.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Kurt, we have some more queued up here in the room, so we're going to go on to Ben.
Hey, myself. So just two questions on the structure of the local ordinance. One is, I know that the state law has increasing penalties if it is corrected after the election as opposed to before, and I assume, but I don't know if they have increasing penalties if it is not corrected as part of an investigation. I know this one involved you doing a lot of work trying to get everything correct. So is our local ordinance structured in a way where there are either increasing penalties or an incentive to correct soon, ideally before the election has taken place? And then my second question is, just in terms of timing, I would assume that if someone pays, let's say, $100,000 to do something, and they don't get, say in December, and they don't get invoiced for it till February, it would be considered an expenditure in December for the case of filings, even though they don't have to pay for it till February? I would assume I don't know. That's a question.
So let me answer your second question. Things a little is very specific. So yes, it is considered at that point an accrued expense. So even though they had done that accrued expense, the 49ers here done that accrued expense in December, they were obligated to report it by the January 31st deadline, which they did not, right? Now, if I had not received the tip as to who did that, we would still not know, and it would be truly dark money. The fact that we identified who the source of that political activity was, the fact that we followed up with it, and the fact that they came in the next business day and responded by filing a campaign committee is a confirmation that they were the ones behind that dark money. Now, to your first question about the FEPC enforces penalties and fines, and they compound if the violator does not resolve that. Our dark money ordinance does not afford that. Our dark money ordinance's penalties are actually quite severe. And in the letter that I sent to the potential violators here of our dark money ordinance, the 49ers, I actually explained and copied basically what was in our ordinance. So let me explain for the benefit of you and everybody listening what those penalties for the dark money ordinance are, because they are very severe. And from the ordinance, it's including but not limited to prosecution as an infraction or a misdemeanor, civil action for injunctive relief or for damages by any city resident that can include recovery of treble damages, cost of litigation including attorney's fees. Here's an interesting one: disqualification of an elected official who benefited from the contribution from voting on a matter in which the contributor has a financial interest. So you could potentially disqualify an elected official who is voting in support of something that benefits the origin of the dark money. And here's a serious one: material breach of any contract you may have with the City of Santa Clara or the Santa Clara Stadium Authority and be grounds for termination of said contract. So that is a very serious penalty for violating the dark money ordinance. If any organization like the 49ers has a contract with the City of Santa Clara or the Stadium Authority, violating the dark money ordinance could subject them to breach of the contract and termination of that contract. In the room, we have another one, Kurt.
Hi, my name is Tufik, and I'm a 20 years resident of Santa Clara. My question is that my understanding is when they did what they did in December, they were not outside the law, because you said they had until the end of January to report it. Now, I don't understand exactly how it works. If I want to do something in November, let's say, what's the requirement? Should I report it 2 months before, 90 days? I don't know exactly how it works. It means that if I spend money now, does it mean I don't have to report it until I hit the deadline? This is my first question. The second question is that since you knew that someone is spending some money and you waited until the deadline passed and you send them a letter, is there anything that you can send them maybe before the deadline? Let's say when you have bills overdue, I think many people, they send you before to let you know that, yeah, the bill is coming and I should be paying the bill. Okay, thanks.
Great question, Tawfiq. The first one is on reporting deadlines. There's actually a published schedule of reporting of deadlines for anybody who is collecting and dispersing and expending money for political campaigns. So, and as you get closer to the election, those reporting requirements get more and more stringent. So right now, as a matter of fact, right now in Santa Clara, we have passed the deadline for accepting any more monetary contributions towards a political campaign. A week ago, if you had received more than $1,000, you have 24 hours to report that contribution. So because we're really close to the election. So there are periods of time. So the January 31st deadline was for the reporting period of any activity between July and December of last year. So that schedule is online. It's on, the city clerks provides it. It's also at the state level. They provide that same schedule for anybody who is participating in political activity. So to your second question about, giving folks notice. Because this was a dark money contribution, we had no idea who to give a notice to. And only until we found out, or we got the tip as to who was behind it, did we then send out that letter, which happened to be at the same time as the closing reporting period. Our city clerk's office is extremely proactive about giving reminders to everybody and anybody who needs to file any paperwork and reporting requirements, including the expenditure reports that we received last week from the 49ers. And I, as myself as well, have sent them multiple correspondence, inquiring and asking them to submit additional work. So the city clerk's office absolutely does. The question here is that they failed to report it. It was dark because we had no idea who was behind it. And then once we found out and we sent out that letter, then they came the next business day. But at that point, it was already past the deadline for reporting. Great. Kurt, we don't have any more people here in the room, but I do have, I am also following the live stream online. And there's a question here from Keith on the live stream. And he's stating, I'm wondering if the money spent by the Mercury News, Metro newspapers, SantaClaraNews.com, Santa Clara Weekly needs to be disclosed. If someone pays someone to write an editorial for any of these and doesn't disclose that payment, is it a violation? So that's a great question, Keith. So certainly any ads, digital ads that are on any of those websites, I'm getting ads in my Facebook feeds now for No On C. Any of those ads that are being, digital ads, print ads, radio ads, all of those need to be reported as expenditures. So those do need to be reported. As far as editorials go, so we all have a First Amendment freedom of speech protected rights. You could send an editorial, Keith, in favor or in opposition of a candidate or a ballot measure. An actual news agency and their editorial board themselves can write their own editorial. Those are protected under First Amendment freedom of speech rights. Those are not reportable expenditures. So great question, Keith. We'll take one from you.
We have somebody that's going to be queued up in just a second, so if you can give me about 30 more seconds until we bring them up, that'd be great. Go ahead, please.
Sounds good. So I did get in another question here from Kirk. What are the penalties for a violation? Can you suspend an organization from doing business with the city? Are there progressive penalties for multiple violations? I think we just answered that question. So I'm going to move on. And if you have one, Kurt, you feel free to jump in. I'm trying to scroll here through the live stream questions as well.
Yeah, go ahead and pick another live stream if you can. We got a couple more queuing up with the screeners right now. They just came in all of a sudden, so we'll have some momentarily for you.
Okay, I have one right here, Kurt, while you're queuing up. Okay, so another question here from the live stream comments. I'd like to know if there could be a limit on how much the cap for these organizations could be. I understand that candidates have a limit. Why not do the same for the PACs, the political action committees? So right now, as I think was mentioned by one of the questioners, the No On C campaign has received, I believe, $617,125 contribution. There is no limit, whether it is there is no limit on measures, for ballot spending or contributions. We're seeing, obviously, at the national level, exorbitant amounts of money that are being spent to influence voters. Again, as long as it is disclosed, it is within the law. In the city of Santa Clara, we have a voluntary expenditure cap that council candidates for city council opt into, which then they get a little star next to their name on the ballot, which means that they're abiding by the ethics pledge, as well as the voluntary expenditure cap. So most candidates in the past have agreed to that voluntary expenditure cap, but that doesn't prevent a political action committee from going and spending money, independent expenditures, to promote candidates to the tune of as many dollars as they would like. So that is a great question. There's another question.
I got one ready for you.
Well, there's another question here from the live stream, which is a really interesting question, particularly because we're here in Silicon Valley, from Sunil. Does this dark money include any other forms of payment like Bitcoin, foreign currency, or gifts? And the answer is yes, it does. Whether the money was in US dollars or any other contribution, but it also could be in-kind contributions as well. So that's like, if there was a gift or there was, something that was not of monetary value, the value of that gift or that in-kind contribution needs to be reported as well. Kurt, we'll turn over to you for a question.
We got a question, and Pat, as I bring you on, we are just trying to talk about the dark money, but go ahead with your question if you would, please. Pat, welcome to the call.
Oh, good. I get to speak. Sorry. Let's bring it back to sort of the bigger picture, because Measure C clearly is driving this discussion. It seems that somehow we got derailed from what was originally redistricting into collapsing it back into 3, and there's now a debate over that. How do we get out of that and get back to not being hostage to dark money? And that's, I guess, my concern. Dark money has reared its ugly head, and suddenly we're not talking about the merits of the ballot. We're talking about dark money. OMG.
Pat, so if I understand your question correctly, you're saying that Measure C is driving this discussion, and I want to be very clear that this town hall, and I'm sure you've heard it at the beginning of the town hall, that this town hall is not to talk about the merits or demerits of Measure C, and we probably wouldn't even have this town hall if there was no violation of dark money, regardless of who's spending what money to try to influence voters to vote one way or another on Measure C. So this town hall really is to talk about dark money, to educate voters about what dark money is, this being the first potential violation of our new ordinance. That's really the purpose of this town hall. And you're right. It ends up, when voters are not able to identify the source of campaign contributions, I think it puts a big cloud and a big question mark over people's head as to, being able to make an informed decision about what's on their ballot. And I think being able to expose and to identify the source of these funds helps as a variable in the equation when people are deciding how to cast their ballots come election day. So thank you for your question, Pat. Again, I don't want to spend the time of this town hall talking about Measure C, because that's really not the focus here. The focus is the dark money, and in this case, the 49ers violating our dark money ordinance. We have another question here on the live stream, Kurt. We have another question here on the live stream, and then we'll probably take one more after that, and then since we are near the top of the hour. So there's a question here about, does the dark money ordinance apply to inquisitive polling for data collection? Who decides if it influences or I think they meant to write or not, because it says or info, which doesn't make English sense. So does the dark money ordinance apply to inquisitive polling for data collection? So long as that polling data is not used for political purposes, then no, it doesn't. But political polling, as the 49ers have reported in their expenditure report that they filed last week, they actually took the poll as an in-kind contribution for the valuation of the poll. And so, because they were caught dealing and conducting this poll, and them coming into to file the campaign committee the next business day, as part of their reporting requirements. Now that they've actually filed their campaign committee, they've now reported that as an in-kind contribution. So great question, Kurt. I'm going to pass it to you for one final question, if you got one on the line, and otherwise we're near the top of the hour. And if you're in the room, if you have a final question, free to step up and ask it before we close.
You covered every base we had. I hand it back to you if you could, please, sir.
Okay, do we have one more here in the room? We do. All right, well, this will be the last question of the night.
We've kind of covered stuff in the past of what's happened, and kind of a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, what's next? What happens if things come through with funding or polls or here and there? Like, what happens? Can we talk about the timeline of reporting, or what happens going forward to the election?
So there are still some additional reporting deadlines for the March 3rd election. We just had the last deadline for campaign contributions close on Friday. Campaign committees are required to report expenditures. We have some deadlines coming up this week. Tomorrow, there's a deadline. There's also deadlines for any sort of last-minute expenditures that committees do. So we'll continue to follow up on those. I mean, that is my job as the elections official, to follow up on those, and we'll continue to pursue with the FPPC, which we've filed a complaint with for late filing requirements, but also on our own end for the dark money violation as well.
Do you mind if I just squeeze
Yeah,
in another
go
one?
ahead.
And then can you kind of talk a little bit about how you guys define inquisitive polling and what that means and how that is determined?
That is a good question. So inquisitive polling versus, sorry, I know you walked away from the mic, but you can holler from over there.
Versus what's political, what's not. How do you define like what questions are, what sources are?
And I think that, so the question is, what is defined as inquisitive polling? That will come up as part of the investigation. You know, not to get too technical, but how many people did you survey? Is this really something that you're using as a guise for trying to influence voters? Or are you really trying to just, you know, get a pulse on voters and kind of the opinions that they have currently? There's also, you know, again, if you're using that poll for political purposes, is it then that do need to be reported? The FEPC actually does have rules around how much do you report for the valuation of a poll based on how old the data is? Because polling data that is 2 years old may not be very relevant or as relevant as polling data that is, you know, a week old. And so there are even requirements and rules within the FPPC about how you report polling expenditures as well.
Could we use as an example the POA poll just from the other day? Could we use that as an example to kind of guide?
If that is being used to inform political a campaign or a campaign committee, then yes, it would be, absolutely.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. We have another question in the room, Kurt, and then we'll probably close it after that.
Hi there, Anthony Becker, resident of Santa Clara. So she just touched on that right now, which was I got a push poll over the weekend on Sunday. A lot of other Santa Clara residents, it's sporadic. We don't know who got it. We don't know who did. But when I saw the POA, then I went on the Intercity's website today to go look up filings. There is no filing for Measure Yes on Measure C. The entire poll was pretty much dedicated towards Measure C, trying to get you to influence your vote on voting for Measure C. So my question is if we're here to talk about dark money, and I know we say it's not about what the 49ers did, but I believe it is what the 49ers did. So the two questions I have is, if this POA is doing this, that's dark money, they're in violation, right? If they don't file it in time, correct?
So I think, you're asking a question that we already discussed earlier, but that's okay, I'll answer it again.
Sorry, I was next door at another
meeting. That's okay, that's fine. We'll answer it again. So the fact that you know who the poll came from, by definition, does not make it dark money. So the fact that you know it came from the Police Officers Association does not make it dark money. Okay. And that's in contrast to what residents received in December, where even myself personally, having received that call, tried to find out who was behind that poll, and they would refuse to answer. So that is, by definition, it does not qualify for the dark money designation. Now, the question then, I think the second part of your question is do we expect them to file? So the question is, or the answer is, if they use that information to influence a campaign committee or the decision on a campaign committee, then the answer is yes, they would be required to file that as an in-kind contribution or as an expenditure. Okay. Now, I also got screenshots from friends who received that poll. They asked about opinions about Measure C, but they also asked residents' opinions about police and fire, as well as a potential safety bond. So, I mean, your comment that it was entirely about Measure C is actually factually incorrect.
Well, it's very similar to the one you're talking about where it was the 49er poll. So it gets to the fact of I believe they have to file for it, especially if it's trying to get people to support Measure C. So it goes back to the fact of, okay, so yeah, Jed York did this thing. If we have a dark ordinance, law, and forgive me, I was next door, so I was trying to hear as much as I can at the same time. If we have a dark money ordinance, then to have some teeth with that dark money ordinance, then if Jed York is being compliant and he's already saying that he's spending the money on this, that's no longer dark money. That's admitting you did it. So is there any teeth in this law by Are we going to fine them? What's the punishment for them?
If I
Because
let me try to understand your question. You're saying that they were in violation of dark money for failing to disclose, and after they got caught, they're disclosing, so no longer they were no longer
but no,
in
they're
violation?
transparent though. But they're transparent by showing that, okay, they got caught. Okay, so they're transparent. Yeah, I know
After
I'm
they
going
got
around here. So
caught and they're in
I'm going to say
violation.
this on record.
So yeah.
Whatever I
want-
say here, I'll probably get
Anthony,
bullied online
I don't
later
want to
on.
make this a debate
So
because
no,
I know
no,
this
no,
is
no,
a
no,
kind
no,
of
no. I'm a taxpayer. I'm asking questions.
Sure.
So the question is, if he did it, he violated, okay? But he's still transparently saying, okay, I'm doing this because he violated, he's transparently doing it. So in order to have teeth with the law, then what's the fine? Is there a fine? Is there a slap on the wrist?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is if we're gonna have some kind of law or an ordinance,
that's a great
let's
question.
have some teeth to it. Because
you allow me to
if we're
answer?
not gonna punish that, I'm looking at the whole yes on Measure C thing, and it's, you know, I asked Councilmember Watanabe this morning.
Okay,
you know,
can
what
I answer your
happened?
question? Can I answer your question? Okay, certainly the $600,000 in contributions that the 49ers reported, 600,000.
That was 300,000
They
this
added
morning.
another 300,000 on Friday.
Okay.
So the $600,000 that they reported as contributions after they had filed their campaign committee would not be a violation of the dark money ordinance because at that point they disclosed that contribution.
Okay.
The $17,125 of the poll, the value of the poll, which
Wasn't
they
disclosed.
conducted, which they did not disclose, was a violation of the dark money
Okay.
ordinance, and that's what they got caught. So when I sent them the warning, if you allow me,
The warning
if I
letter,
sent them
yeah.
the warning letter on January 31st for failing to disclose within the reporting period, they came in the next business day and filed their campaign committee, and in that filing report, they filed the 17,125. 2 days later is when they filed the 300,000. Last Friday is when they filed the second 300,000. So I think that answers your question about which of their contributions was dark money, which of it wasn't. It is still a violation of dark money, even if afterwards they filed their campaign committee, the contributions that
Okay.
were done after that would
Understandable.
not be in violation of dark money.
Understandable. So basically everybody
So-
in this room knows
So
that
I just
they
want to be
did it.
clear, Anthony, this is not like a debate. I know you're kind of the last question here of the forum of
Okay.
tonight. So if you have another question, go for it.
Okay, well, yeah, the last question is that every mailer I've gotten from the city seems to be very biased on Measure C. So would that be considered dark money? Because we're not claiming, I mean, it's actually illegal for a city to take sides in this. So that's where the question is
So
if
we
the
had that
city
question
is-
earlier as well, and I know
Okay,
you were
and if
next
the,
door.
if the
so-
city is doing this and is biased towards Measure C, and then we have a POA over here saying this, and nobody's filing
So would
on
you
that
allow me to,
thing
would you
that
allow me to
says-
answer? Because I know we
Can I
already answered this
finish?
exact question, and you're welcome to rewatch the live stream and the video to get that answer, but I'll be happy to answer you here again one more time. So the city is impartial and unbiased towards any sort of ballot measure or candidate. As you know, most of a city's elections happen only in November. This is a rare occurrence in which it happens in a primary election. And on top of that, if you allow me, and on top of that, this is the first time where California is doing its primaries in March and not in June. So the city has and continues to push out educational information to alert voters that there's an election coming. We have a special election here in Santa Clara. We actually have a special election also for the police chief, but it is uncontested, so really there's not much education to be done around there, if you allow me. But the mailers, if you look at them, they do not take a position for or against. They simply restate what is in the city attorney's impartial analysis that is in everybody's ROV booklet, which, by the way, the city also pays money to the ROV to publish that unbiased information as well. So the city has not violated anything with regards to spending public funds on influencing voters one way or another. The city has simply sent out educational mailers to educate voters that there is a special election on the March ballot that is out of cycle, and to help inform them that where they can get that information and what the summary of that information is. So with that, I can take a follow-up question after this, but I know that there's a lot of people that are on the phone and on the live stream, and I'd like to end it since we already over the 8 o'clock, over the hour. So I'll be happy to take any further questions that you have after. And Kurt, I don't know if you have any other closing comments from those on the phone?
No, just this. Anybody that, whether they got their question in or not, can leave us a message with their contact information if you want us to get back to you at the very end of this call, which is in just about 30 seconds. So bring us to the finish line if you wouldn't mind, please, sir.
Awesome, thank you, Kurt. So I wanted to thank everybody for participating again in this very first town hall meeting that we've done for as long as I can remember. And certainly, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning of the town hall, this is something that you know, this is the first of many to come town halls that I'll be hosting as your city clerk. The council actually approved a monthly town hall series that we would be doing with council members in their districts. So look forward to that. We will publish information about that as soon as we get some dates and locations scheduled with the various council members. And again, this is the very first where we've actually taken live telephone questions, and we've taken live questions from the live stream, and we've obviously taken live questions here from the room. So I want to thank everybody for participating, and don't forget that on March 3rd is the election. Early voting centers are open now, so you're welcome to go to any of the early voting centers, which again is the first time the ROV is doing this. So, you know, you're welcome to go to any of those, but March 3rd is the election. And again, thank you everybody and have a wonderful night.